recording. Welcome to the Alchemist Inkwell.
This is the spiritual podcast for grounded people.
I'm Emily.
And I'm KristaLyn, and I love saying that.
How'd you do? It's so fun.
It's my favorite part.
And today we have a really cool episode talking to you guys, coming to you guys. Of course, we're talking to you, but we're really excited about this one on a very concrete level because we're really going to dive into, though typically we talk about like the astrology and the energy of the week coming your way and all that stuff. This week is kind of in a big week on a social level as well, because obviously this episode is coming out on Thanksgiving. And so we wanted to, at least in America, I know there's Canadian Thanksgiving's in October and other countries don't have it, but in America it's coming out on Thanksgiving. And we wanted to talk about ways to make Thanksgiving an actual high vibe celebration again, as opposed to something that is so low vibration as it currently sits.
Yeah. And it's really cool that you talked about it on a social level, because one of the astrological aspects that I do bring into the fact that this conversation is so pertinent and relevant right now is a connection between a social planet and a transpersonal planet. Really quickly, social planets are basically your Saturn and Jupiter. They're super far out there. They move pretty slowly, but not as slowly as the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, who basically take generations to make their impact in the signs that they're in. So we have this thing that astrologers have been watching for all of 2021. And that is the Saturn square Uranus. And we've seen it a couple of times, but Uranus has been on the move in Taurus, where it is right now, since I believe 2018. And so all of these conversations about, one of the ways that I've really been able to understand it lately is creating new traditions, revisiting traditions, reworking traditions, and revolutionizing the way that we understand our current traditions so that we can do better with them. Doing better is definitely a theme that seems to be going on with this. And Saturn is structure. So what we're really doing, Saturn also talks about tradition, right? And Uranus in Taurus talks about nature. So we are restructuring and revamping our traditions. I saw in a commercial today saying, start a new tradition, which a lot of people after 2020 are learning to do right now, because we have different conditions to operate in now. And that is a product as well of this change that has been going on as part of nature and through nature and to our natures and the structures and resources that we rely on.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of our traditions are being changed for us too. Like there's like not even options. Like we saw that, of course, last year with any sort of holiday get-togethers, like people couldn't do that because of 2020, it being what it was, and because of the pandemic and all those things. And then, this year people are like, well, we kind of liked some of the stuff from last year. We don't want to go backwards. And so we're kind of being forced on an energetic level. Before we dive into anything, do you have any specific, I just thought this would be fun to talk about because it just came up. Is there a specific tradition that you love that you have with like Thanksgiving that you want to highlight or keep, and one that you'd like to change?
So what I like to keep is, my husband and I decorate for Christmas that day, because it's a happy medium that we came up with, where I would be decorating for Christmas probably on November 1st if I had my way, just because I love that people focus on joy in the Christmas season. So I like to bring that up as quickly as I can in the year. So we take that day aside and we decorate for Christmas. And I like the family aspect. I like the gratitude aspect is huge. Like people getting to focus on what's good in their lives is amazing to me. And I think that we have more to be thankful for than we may have given ourselves permission to have, or than tradition has allowed us to recognize up until now. So leading from that, some things I'd like to change is the actual honesty behind the day. Like I want to be more aware in my practices. I want to be thankful for what the earth has offered us, what God has offered through the earth, through the things that have happened for me and to me and around me in that year, finding a bright side, even to the thing, like I almost want to do an unthanks moment and flip the coin and say, but this is how I can recognize today consciously that this is something that happened for me. So, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later in the episode, but I'm turning Thanksgiving and it's not that it's not a Thanksgiving kind of day, but the word has a different meaning than Thanksgiving right now. And until that is rectified, I choose to use different terminology that doesn't hurt me and also doesn't hurt anyone else. So
100%.
I'm coming into a time where I want to start getting into like homesteading and rewilding and all of those things, and really getting back to earth the way earth here in my place in the world should be. So I'm doing plants giving, where I'm going to give plants and more indigenous plants and indigenous food sources and sprouts to the people that I visit on Thanksgiving, so that they have the opportunity to take something that is from here and grows naturally here and thrives here, and let it be given back to the earth, so that we can let the earth be who the earth is supposed to be. Because even our grass is from other countries, which
Right.
I mean, it's great in that country, but like, can we just let the grass grow? You know?
No,
Little
I think
bit of
that's
a
a really good.
soapbox.
No, it's a really good call. And I mean, I think that would be calling it Thanksgiving is propaganda. If we're being 100% honest, like Thanksgiving, like reason it was named that way is to get people on board with celebrating it, is like the hard truth of it, even though the context of the actual word, if you're looking at that on a like actual level of what it's comprised of, is a beautiful concept, but the energy of the word, when you look at the energy of the word, is horrible. So I love that you want to reclaim that, and also the idea of Plantsgiving, which I'm sure we can talk more about too as we dive in, of like establishing that tradition. It's super cool, and it's something that Krista found, and I think it's a really neat idea to establish like a rewilding of your area and reconnecting with the actual plants of your area, which is neat. Tahoe has this really unique thing. So we have multiple boards established to keep Tahoe as like natively as possible, I guess. There's like certain things you're not allowed to do. Like you cannot paint your house an unnatural color. You can only plant certain plants. There's definitely a lot of plants you're not allowed to. Like it's very, very, if you look at Tahoe from the air, you can't see the buildings. That's the whole point.
I've noticed that. Yeah.
Which is really unique. And so it's super cool. And like, even when it comes to like planting your lawn or paving your driveway, like you have to get so many levels of like approval from all these natural based boards, which can be detrimental as well. And also, can get political and all sorts of stuff. But I always have found a lot of value in that same kind of idea of like, we don't just plant grass that's from somewhere else. Like it's very intentionally wild still, which is awesome. Our traditions are, one tradition we have that I just think is kind of funny. For Thanksgiving, we always eat around the ping pong table because it's the only table big enough for at my parents' house, which is just super funny. And I love that idea. As far as the actual meaning of the day, though, I want to change a lot of it. And every night before dinner, me and the kids always say what we're thankful for before you're allowed to eat, instead of saying grace, because we're not super religious, but I wanted us to do something to honor the fact that we're getting to sit down and eat. So we always say our thankful fors before we eat every day. And I like that energy, but I want to make sure that this celebration where you get together with family is more focused on healing than it is about giving thanks, if that makes sense. Like if it's more about healing your connection with the land and understanding the things that, us as white people have done wrong and have messed up going forward. So anyway, just touching on that, I thought that would be a cool thing to chat on.
Yeah. And I love that. And, to your point, that's what inspired this episode is, how can we as individuals among this category of humanity that has a lot to remember and to, again, do better with, how can we take steps on a personal level? Because a lot of the issues, it's tragic, and there are ways we can make a difference, but a lot of the issues are systemic. And so that's so frustrating. Like me sitting here in my little house, what can I do? And there are things that we can do. And there are things that we can do in our personal lives. There are things we can do on a social scale. And, again, placing your energy, your investments, your support in the things that will contribute to the betterment of the situation is definitely something that you can do on a very active level. But what about Thanksgiving? What about daily in your life? How can you start living as someone who unconditionally loves everyone around them and does, as the Black Genzennials mentioned to us earlier on the last episode, how can we just see people as people and just honor that everybody has a place in the world and we're allowed to have our traditions? Everyone is, like, even the people who were here first are allowed to maintain them. And that's where the idea of Frozen 2 songs started trending on TikTok lately. And I remembered I'd only seen it once, which blew my mind because I'm a Disney nerd. And I was like, how have I only seen this movie once? I should watch it again. And then I realized how much it does seem to be about a very high vibe approach to reparations, acknowledging that so much change has happened and like, what can the people of this generation do to make amends, and emphasis on the mend in amends. Like, how can we mend relationships? So that's where we're kind of going today.
Yeah, absolutely. So Krista and I really wanted to get an Indigenous creator on here to talk about how we can mend, how we can high vibration go forward, honoring Thanksgiving and kind of reclaiming it in a way that is for honoring Indigenous people, honoring the land, and healing those relationships, because that's what it should be. We were both kind of like, well, canceling Thanksgiving and stopping doing this practice isn't actually fixing anything. Let's change it. Let's reclaim it. Let's make it a different thing, which is what we've seen a lot of Indigenous creators talk about as well. So we wanted to get someone on here. Unfortunately, it was kind of short notice. Obviously, our show only started like 2 weeks ago, so it was kind of hard to get somebody on. So what we wanted to do is talk about things that we've seen Indigenous creators talk about ways that we can approach Thanksgiving in a very high vibration way. And our go-to method of doing that is always to show through a fiction story ways that we can be better. And when Krista suggested Frozen 2, first of all, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, so I was immediately on board, but I had never actually looked at it through the context of high vibration reparations and the actual healing between a white community and an Indigenous community. And I don't want to say that we're saying that the Indigenous representation in Frozen 2 is perfect and amazing, because that is not what we're saying at all. We're using this as a like allegorical example of how you can apply healing and the ways that we could do this right to real life Indigenous community. So I wanted to highlight that too right off the bat, because I don't know, and I can't speak to the Indigenous representation in the film because I'm not Indigenous at all.
Yeah.
I have so much Norwegian blood. I can trace it to the exact town. Like, that is me. So I don't, big, tall, white people who burn in the sun. So I don't even remotely want to say that like we are speaking from an Indigenous perspective, because we're not. We wanted to bring it in of how can we highlight things that we have done wrong historically, generationally, even though it wasn't us specifically, it was our people harming another people, and we keep celebrating the harm that we created each year with Thanksgiving. And so how can we flip that on the head and make universal, like, unconditional love universal again, while highlighting some major issues that are happening in the Indigenous community right now as well. And we did want to say too, and I just want to shout this out, we'll bring it up throughout the episode, but we did, in the show notes of this episode, you can find the handles of a bunch of Indigenous creators that we find very valuable, that speak on these issues from an Indigenous perspective way better than we do. So please go check them out, because what we're saying on this episode is not their perspective, and we want to make sure that their perspective is the end all be all of all of this.
Yeah, I think at best, and very functionally and helpfully, this is a starting point for people who don't know where to start. And it's a Disney frame on a starting point. So like there's not much that's very much more accessible as a starting point than watching a movie designed for children and adults alike. But this is where you can start, and then you pursue that curiosity with the foundational understanding to start listening to voices who have the wisdom, have the background, have the tradition, and the inherited knowledge to be able to educate further. And I think that that's really important. So if you're someone who's like, I want to do better, I have no idea how to do that as an individual, that's where we were too. So welcome. This is a good starting point.
Also, we're going to talk through it a lot, but like, please go watch Frozen 2 in the context of Indigenous reparations. I also want to say, I haven't actually seen any creators, Indigenous creators or otherwise, or Indigenous voices actually asking for reparations other than just conversation and change on like reservations, that sort of thing. In the same way that like the Black community, a lot of them, some are not asking for reparations. Some are think that reparations should happen for slavery. I don't know, but I haven't actually seen any Indigenous people talk about that. So when we're talking about reparations, we're not actually talking about like payment from the government, which is a lot of the context that reparations is put in. We're talking about energetic exchange.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a repairing. It's
A
repairing of the relationship, human to human.
Yeah. Exactly. Not necessarily like let's ask for money for the government, that kind of thing. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like, how can we repair bonds that were severed unnecessarily by our generations previous and make it better going forward, which is basically what our show is about anyway, is let's talk about the energy of going forward. And so go back and watch Frozen 2 in that context. Like, go back and watch, holy hell, like Krista will say, like, we both watched this movie this weekend. We were both like, oh my God, it starts during a harvest festival, which is what Thanksgiving is. If we're looking at it on a purely pagan like aspect, it's a harvest festival. Like it genuinely is. And many different cultures honor that throughout the world, having a harvest festival. And this is kind of a variation on that, which of course made it manipulatable, right? Because if everyone was used to having a harvest festival, we can now say, oh, look at how great white people did with this harvest festival, which was that. But yeah, so we were both just like, oh my God, how did I not put that together before that it occurs during a harvest festival? And that's like the launching point for the entire story, which is crazy to me still. I was just like, whoa, it's fall and they're celebrating like, I just knocked a bunch of stuff off of my desk and they're celebrating the harvest of all these things. And it starts that they're celebrating it without the Indigenous people or even thinking that the Indigenous people are evil and negative and bad. Without knowing better, out of the ignorance of just hearing the one story, which is exactly what we hear on Thanksgiving. I had this conversation with my kids as we were watching the movie. I was like, this is a Thanksgiving story. And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah, like this is, she knows the only half the story. And we had to talk about what they learned about Thanksgiving in school. One of their teachers this year is actually making them do a project on different Indigenous tribes native to our area. Everyone's partnered up and they have to pick a tribe that's native to our area. And that's their Thanksgiving project, which I love so much.
That is cool.
Right? Instead of the like, let's dress up as pilgrims and talk about the Mayflower. Nope. It's like, let's talk about the Indigenous cultures, which I love, but I had to tell them like the Thanksgiving story you've learned about in school is wrong. It's not true.
Yeah, I had a teacher like that even when I was in elementary school, way back when I was in elementary school. But they had us study like how they lived, how, pick a certain tribe that was at least more or less local to our area and study like how they did housing, because it's not all just teepees and stuff, like we got to study the different structures that were built, the different methods that were used, the skills levels and like all of the amazing things that I could never even amount to in my life ever once, like I can sew, but I couldn't do anything near to what I was able to learn about how a culture that to me seemed ancient because I was 9 was able to just master things and incorporate all of nature. And I think that's a huge theme, again, with the Uranus and Taurus, but also with where we're headed, especially after 2020, and a theme in Frozen 2. One of the things that they say was the Northaldra, the culture that they talk about, they weren't all magical. They were just in sync and respected the magic of nature around them and were in sync with the elements of nature. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's so much less a fantasy than you can imagine, looking back at how it actually was and still is in a lot of communities today that are Indigenous and Native. They understand so much more than we do. We put ourselves in boxes and separated ourselves. And I think that's one of the drawbacks that I think we're walking back in more modern times.
Oh, no. And I love that the being in sync with nature piece is, I mean, that's when I was evacuated earlier this year. For those listeners who might not know this, I was evacuated earlier this year because of a huge wildfire. It was massive. It burnt tons of acres, and it burnt over 100,000 acres. And at the time, when I was coping with this, my house was okay. A lot of people's houses weren't, so it was really horrible. But at the time, I was reading articles, and one of the articles I read said it was from a retired fire captain. He was like 85 years old, and he was like, yeah, it used to be if there was a wildfire that got over 100,000 acres, that was a once in a career thing. Now if you have a wildfire that like gets over 1 million acres, that's a once every 5-year thing. Like it's a big deal. And you have 100,000 acre wildfires constantly all summer. And at the time, I was reading a lot of articles and posts from Indigenous people saying this is why we need to give stewardship of the land back to Indigenous people. And it's 100%. We came into a land that we knew nothing about and was like, hey, we're going to caretake this and it's going to work. And it doesn't work. And then we're like, we're just going to keep going. Like that doesn't make any logical sense. Like they're in sync. They still have the ancient practices of tending the land. Like that should happen. Like let's get back in that flow and connect on a higher level and honor the fact that other people know how to do this better.
Yeah. And it's not even that, traditionally and in lore, they were the steward. No, they actually have techniques and like we could benefit from these techniques. They're smarter at this than we are. I mean, it's very Socratic, right? Yeah. You can be smart at one thing and completely uneducated in another, but that doesn't mean that you can't then be educated. And some people are masters at that thing, and you want to go to them for that education. We do it all the time. Teachers master things to teach everybody, you know, like youth, college, whatever. I do certification classes all the time. You get your mentors. And why not allow ourselves? Like, one of the beliefs that I have been working on lately, and this might be a really great thing for any listeners too, is I am willing to be educated, which means I'm also willing to acknowledge that I misunderstood something. I'm willing to ask questions. I'm willing to be guided instead of having to be right at the start. Like, you can't be right all the time immediately. You're putting way too much pressure on yourself if you assume that that's who you have to be. You are doing your best in your stuff, and there's someone else who's doing great in another thing, and you can complement each other with your knowledge and your wisdom. How great is that? I love that.
No, that's how it's supposed to. That reminds me, and this is kind of a really sidetrack, but apparently it's coming up, so I need to talk about it. When I was working with these two women, and they were really connected to astral projection and traveling to other planets and those kind of things, which was really cool. I was all for it. But they were talking about how the education models of some of these other planets is really to just be like, what are you good at? Let's figure that out. And let's super educate you in that so that you can be really successful in that way. And then other people can be really successful at the things they are. And then it was a symbiotic relationship, which is kind of like the idea behind like things like the Waldorf school. But it's like living without ego in a way too, because it's not like I'm good at everything. It's no, I'm like, I know consciously I'm really good at this, but I'll ask for help when I need something over here. And I love that. And I think that that's how we should highlight things. And it's not just like this person's artistic and this one's good at math. It's no, like this person is really good at figuring out complex problems. And this person is really empathetic and is good at relating to people and taking it to more of an energetic level too. But yeah, I think that skill of being able to, other people are better at other things, and like we should be able to acknowledge that. And that's a huge thing when it comes to like racism is that's blocking us, is not doing that. Also, just to kind of circle back around to Frozen 2, at the very start of the film, the dad tells the story of like how they gave these indigenous people this gift, and the indigenous people weren't thankful for this gift. And I was just like, the whole time I'm like, oh shit, that's exactly the Thanksgiving story, is like we were here and we gave mutual gifts to these indigenous people, and our presence was this gift, even though they didn't want what we were and that's like the very first story. And then it's like, oh, they attacked us even though we gave them this gift, and there's like no enlightenment of like why would they attack anything like that. And that is so on par with our Thanksgiving story. Is like they gave in the movie, they gave the gift of damming up this river. And the spoiler alert, guys, this whole episode is gonna be spoilers. So if you haven't seen Frozen 2, go watch it and then come back.
Very important.
We're gonna spoil fucking everything. But yeah, the indigenous people didn't want the dam. They didn't want their natural water to be dammed up. They could hear that nature was upset about it. And the white people didn't give a fuck because the dam benefited them. Kind of at the core of it. But it was, but it's a gift to you.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's the Arendelians saying this benefits us, and we're going to frame it in a way that makes it sound like it benefits you so that we can have what we need. And, there was a fear when you find out later the context around it. So again, spoiler alert, but it's been out for over a year. So I hope you've seen it if you're listening to this episode. If not, definitely check it out and then come back and listen, because you're really going to enjoy this. But he frames it as magic being the thing that can't be trusted. And later, Elsa, in a power move, says magic's not like that. That's not what magic does. Fear is what can't be trusted. And when you do something out of fear, that's not unconditional love. It's exactly the opposite. So gift giving, as we're entering into the season of gift giving and harvest, and like, what is a harvest but the gifts that nature gives us and the bountiful, harvest and things like that? It's a blessing. Blessings can't come from hate. That's called a curse. So if you want to bless someone, if you want to give a gift to someone and show gratitude, that comes from a place of unconditional love. So you can't act out of fear. And one thing that I always do is I ask myself, when I want to do something, I try to pause and say, okay, but am I doing this motivated by fear, or am I doing this motivated by love? Because sometimes even a harsh seeming thing like tough love can be the most loving thing for the situation. But you have to know where that's coming from. You have to know what energy is behind it, because that's the intention that you're putting out into the world. And that's what that other person is receiving, that is being affected by the action.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this too. This is the first time I was thinking about it in this context, because the whole concept in the movie is that the forest shuts down and like locks everybody out. So no one can come back into the forest, and everyone who was in the forest is locked inside of the forest. And I was like, oh my God, it was protecting them so that they couldn't get hurt anymore. Like you're thinking like, oh, it was like a punishment to the Arendelians or whatever, because they gave them this gift. And that's kind of how the film frames it initially, so you feel that way. But no, it was so that they were protecting these people in which that like lived off the land and thrived in this native symbiotic relationship with the land from any additional harm that the Arendelians, the white people, were coming in and putting on them, essentially the colonizing people, which is a beautiful concept. Like I kind of, and then the protection doesn't lift until the Arendelians have made right the wrongs so that they could have a safe relationship once more with the people who live off the land and who are native to the land, in that way, which I just thought was really beautiful when I started thinking about that. Like I didn't ever think about it as protection. Like you hear about it as like the forest shut down because the forest was so angry because of the gift, which yes, but it was to protect people and to protect the land and to protect the forest and the spirits of nature that lived within it.
Well, and that's one thing I like to think about when we talk about energetic entities or beings or forces of nature in any context, is I truly believe that all forces of nature, all energies, all spiritual concepts, God, all of those things truly come from a place of unconditional love, and they balance that which needs to be balanced. So I don't think the forest could have acted out in anger. It did what was necessary to restore balance. And sometimes in this case, that was cutting off access until everybody else caught up with what needed to happen. And Anna said it beautifully in the movie. She said, Arendelle has no future until we make this right. So until you restore a balance where things can move again, until the cogs of nature can begin turning the way that they're supposed to turn, there is no real justified future, because there is always going to be something that stands in the way. There's always going to be a roadblock, because it's not an open, unconditional love. It's not a path forward. It's just a cycle, kind of like what we talked about in the last episode with the Black Genzennials. You can't perpetuate the cycle. You need to allow it to become a spiral. You need to lift it up.
Yeah. And I love that you called out that line. I was going to highlight that line too, of like, Arendelle doesn't have a future until we fix this. Energetically, I was like, hold on, that is exactly correct. Like that is that's a lot of the resistance and stuff that we're coming up against right now, and the things that are breaking is because we're choosing not to fix the things that need fixing, especially in this country, all over the world, but especially in this country, it's happening. Is if we took the time and actually put our money where it should go and put our resources where they should go in order to fix the wrongs that have been committed, as opposed to just being like, but we didn't do that, our ancestors did, so we're just going to move past that. That would energetically change the scope of our world in such a deep and meaningful way, because the things that the government is continuing to do to Indigenous people is so messed up. Krista and I touched on this briefly, but like, I don't know if any of you have ever spent time on reservations. Some reservations are really awesome. Some reservations are absolutely horrendous and horrific, and the food discrepancies are there, and they've been shuttled off to land that they can't even work. And it's just so horrible. And instead of fixing those problems in order to make a better future, people are continually choosing to ignore them. And so like when I heard that line in the movie, I was like, yeah, for sure. Like it's a level of sacrificing the comfort that we have in some ways in order to fix the rights, or to right the wrongs that happened over a long, long time ago, that no, we didn't do it, our ancestors did it, but it doesn't matter. We're benefiting from a system that benefited them, that they created, and we need to change that.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating. When I turned 13, one of the things my mom did for me was she wanted me to have perspective. So she started taking me on, I call them Goodwill trips now, because, like Thanksgiving, the word mission trip has taken on a different meaning than what it was with the intention behind our trips. We would go places, take clothes and things to be able to offer to people who didn't have them, and just play with them and have a good time. We weren't there to force any kind of ideals on anybody. We just had a good time. We would help rebuild schools after earthquakes and things like that in different places. And going there, I saw certain conditions that I was like, wow, the world outside of America, blah, blah, blah. And then a couple of years ago, I went on a storm chase. And if you've ever been on a storm chase, you end up just sleeping wherever you end up. So you look for the closest motel. That's where you are for the night. And it's not always the best conditions, But some of the conditions, and especially on a Native American reservation, which I was looking forward to visiting, I get there and the conditions were not great. They just weren't. They were comparable to some places that I had been taught were developing country problems, and that's just not true, because it's here at home too. And to know that happens all over the place, it saddens me. And that was one of the things that really helped to wake me up to, wow, okay, no, this is a moment where I can't unsee this. I can't unknow this. So we need to do better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I saw recently that other countries actually have commercials to get money for donations to feed people in America. And that is so not okay when, at a deep level, like we have more than enough money and resources to feed everybody and make everyone comfortable and have a comfortable, wonderful life in the way they want to live it, not in the white ideal of that, but the way they want to live it in the way that they would like to. And we could do that, but we don't. And also, it's very interesting about, less than, if walking, I could walk there in probably 20-30 minutes from my house. It's a grave site. It's like all fenced in, and it's the last Indigenous person to be buried on their land before it became federalized in the country. And it's so sad because it's right there. Like it's right next to the corral that I used to work at. And so I would ride by it every single day. And it's this little tiny thing. And it always broke my heart because I know that area is actually being archaeologically investigated. Like it was pre-COVID anyway, investigated into because of all of it was a native burial site essentially in some way. And they're digging that up and excavating it and all of that. But it's just like this tiny little plot of like, this was the last person. I'm like, that is horrific. Like, what? This is their land. And we just decided like, nope, you can't bury your people here anymore. And like, that's something that should be rectified and fixed, or at least honored, that is the place for them. And, it's the same kind of idea of this no longer belongs to you. Go sit over here. Which is just not okay. But in the film, so to circle back around, it has a really high vibration solution to all of these things, which I think is just one of the most incredible parts. Not only is the movie so good with, hey, like we're a part of nature, communing with nature, you actually, like throughout the film, she actually works with all of the different spirits of the elements of nature, from the rock giants to the little fire salamander to the wind, which is just leaves that they call gale, to the water horse that has a name that I don't remember, but has one. I don't know what it is. I don't think they say it in the film, but it's credited like at the end with a name, so I know there is one. But she like works with that and then becomes kind of the bridge between nature and people, which is just so cool and unique. So there's that elements to it too, which is really awesome. But then like the actual solution of breaking down the dam and fixing the problem that happened, even though it could potentially wipe out the entire city of Arendelle, Anna still makes the choice. If it doesn't matter, we have to fix this problem, and whatever's going to be is going to be. We're going to work together to find a new future. And like, yes.
Yeah. And like several things that reminds me of in the movie. First of all, one of the things when I first watched the movie was I couldn't figure out the function plot wise of the salamander, the fire spirit. Right. And I was like, okay, it's the representation of fire, but we could have done a different thing. Why this? And what I realized was when the fire spirit is introduced, it shows the people in the forest that they can trust Elsa, that Elsa is part of the spirits of nature. And it recognizes Elsa, who is in human form, as a part of nature. It reminds like the viewer and everyone involved that like people are a part of nature. There's no separation there. We've just imagined that. And that to me was just like, yes, because people are natural. Every single one of us is a form of nature. And if we can remember that we are a part of nature, again, a lot of what it comes back to is remembering that the land is not something to be taken advantage of or taken for granted or overutilized. It's something to be worked with and in harmony with. And I think that that's so important. Like you even get, there were several Arendellian soldiers who were trapped inside the mist as well. And you realize, even as they're kind of going head to head with the indigenous people of the forest, that they don't want to fight. They're over it, but they're like, well, here's my duty. So I have to do this. And I'm going to protect the Queen of Arendelle. But they banter too. The leaders banter between each other. They've already kind of repaired that, but that almost ancestral belief, that inherited conditioning of, but this is my duty, is the only thing, that last vestige of, I would say the only unhealthy thing remaining in the relationship. And even that falls away at the end, where it's like, nope, we'll do this together. Like, that's obviously the right thing to do. I've seen enough. I know you as a person, so I'm not here to fight anymore. The fight had like ended long ago, and it's not even our fight anymore. Let's just let it not be a fight now. Let's work together. And I really, really love that part.
And it's important to note that that happens after
Mhm.
Anna destroys the dam, after Anna gets rid of and they support her, the soldiers support her in destroying the dam. But like after this big action that says we're fixing this problem, then we move forward together. It's not like, well, that was in the past, let's move forward together now, when there's been no healing. It's no, we healed this relationship, we fixed the problem. It's not a band-aid, it's actually gone. And then they get to move forward together in peace, which is, I think, the huge distinction to put, because everyone wants to jump forward to the move together in peace part without without the healing bit.
Yeah, there is. And the problem is, that is the part of change that everybody forgets. When you look at change, and back to the astrology, Uranus's main archetype is change, like drastic, like sharp change, like a pivot. People like to be like, oh, change. One day it's this, the next day it's that. Boom. No, change is a process. It really is, especially with where we're at right now, with Saturn interacting with Uranus. To bring this to modern day, it is a slow, steady change. And the reason it's slow and steady is because it's building something to last, but it is deconstructing something that wasn't working. And you want to do that carefully, so that when you build it back, you know what to not do this time. It's the whole Edison thing of 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. We're understanding that right now. And a lot of people right here in this moment are like, when is this going to end? When can we move on? When can we, just start doing something else? And it's like, well, once you've learned, once you've processed, once you've grieved what you need to grieve, once you've accepted what you need to accept, then you have the foundation to build on. It's so funny. When I was a kid, my mom, we were watching an episode of Seventh Heaven on ABC Family. I think it was Fox Family back then. That tells you like the time of this. And one of the kids was being sent away for doing something. And my mom said, that's why you need a firm foundation. And I was sitting on the couch with my mom, but my brother was leaning on the couch. And this makes sense. By the way, this is airing shortly before my brother's birthday. Happy birthday, Sean. My mom said, I'm just glad that we were able to provide you guys with a firm foundation. And as if to just kind of mock that a little bit, my brother let his arm give out and he just collapsed and fell over because he didn't have a firm foundation. And it was hilarious. And it's like one of our family running jokes right now. But that's the thing. If you don't have a firm foundation, your elbow could give out and you could just fall over, and then you have to start over again. So taking our time to learn what went wrong, how not to do that again, and how to use it as a foundation to learn from is really important. So being in the process of change, I get it. It's frustrating. It's a stuck kind of feeling, but it is the most sustainable form of progress.
Yeah. And on that note, because I do want to talk about solutions and things you guys can do, because Krista and I we did some research about that. And we also have some ideas. The first bit of advice I want to offer as far as like how you can start making the change is kind of what Anna says in the movie right before she destroys the dam, which I was just like, that's perfect, is to do the next right thing. And it's not right through your lens necessarily. It's right through the people who are saying they are hurt, the people who are saying that this has caused pain, and listening to them to figure out what the next right thing to do for you would be in order to honor their suffering and what they have gone through.
Yeah. And I love that in the song. And again, the songs are probably to me the most important part, because not only are they great, but also what part are you repeating when you're done watching the movie? You're singing the songs. So the writers, the creators of this story, they know that. So they're putting into these songs these lessons they really want to stick. And The Next Right Thing to me is one of the best songs I've ever heard in a movie, because I won't look too far ahead. It's too much for me to take, but this next step, this next choice is one that I can make. We don't need to look too far ahead, because that's overwhelming. We can't imagine all of the things that will come from the innumerable choices we get to make in between. But the next right thing is something that we have control over. So rather than getting fearful, which leads to anger and frustration over feeling powerless, over creating something out of nothing, How about creating the next right thing out of what you've got with you, out of the resources and the knowledge that you possess here and now? And I really, really love that, because she uses that after losing literally everything. I can't think of a more rock bottom for her to be in, because she's utterly alone, but taking the next step, dealing with when the sun comes up, making it clear that nothing will ever be the same again. She makes the choice to hear the voice and do the next right thing. And it's just like, wow. I know, like, the fact that it rhymes makes it sound cheesy, but let it and remember it and repeat it to yourself when you feel stuck, because
I mean, that's why commercials have jingles that stick in your head. It's so that you internalize them and therefore buy the thing. So internalize that and buy the thing, right? Like buy
into the solution.
Yeah. And it's important, like, us as humans, when things, and this is what our brain does to us, when things are never going to be the same again, we have this immediate fear and resentment, and that it's important to remember that the energy of change is not negative. It's not negative. It's never been negative. It's just fear energy that comes in that scares us and makes us think that no matter what, the change is going to be bad for us in some way. Even when we have amazing changes that happen, like you get offered an amazing promotion at work and you're like, oh my gosh, that sounds so great. Your brain literally goes to but what you're not going to be good enough to do it. And what if it's not sustainable? What if they get rid of the position? Like, who knows what? That's immediately what our brain goes to, because it's just the fear of difference that comes in. And it's important to know that, like, despite that fear, you can still do the next right thing, and that it can still be an amazing thing that happens.
Yeah. And I know there's a lot of guilt that we tend to put on ourselves when we first voyage into this idea of making this particular kind of change. And they actually cover that in the movie too, when they happen upon the ship. And I'm not going to give away too much about that, but when they happen upon the ship, Elsa starts blaming herself. And Anna says this beautiful thing, that you're not responsible for their choices. You're responsible for your choices. So while you're not responsible for what happened in the past, you can make a difference in doing the next right thing, doing the better thing now. And I honestly think the best line for how we can really frame allyship in any kind of context comes from Kristoff. He rides in on a reindeer out of nowhere, sees Anna, no context, knows she's trying to get the giants to chase her. And he's just like, I'm here. What do you need? And that's all he does. I'm here. What do you need? And later he says, my love is not fragile. Oh my gosh.
I mean, I stand Kristoff so hard for so many millions of reasons. I actually had this conversation with the kids as we were watching the movie, and I pointed that out. I was like, that is the person you want as a partner, period. The person, it doesn't matter what's going on. You're upset. Something's going on. I'm here. What do you need? They don't ask questions. They're just like, okay, I'll do that. You guys can talk about it later. It doesn't matter, but like, I need to do that. Also, she goes to apologize. And he's like, my love is not fragile. It's fine. It's okay. Like, you were sorry. It doesn't matter. Like, we can move on from that. But also in the first Frozen film, before he ever kisses her, he asks if he can. And it's just like, talk about some healthy, evolved, like high vibration partnership there. And I talk to the kids in like the context of consent of like, when someone kisses you, they should ask. Period. You know, like, that's important. If you're going to kiss somebody, you need to ask them if you can. So he's just this perfect example of allyship, of how you should show up for another person, how showing up for someone doesn't mean self-sacrifice. And I want to put that in there too. It's not that he's pushing away whatever's going on with him and whatever. It's, this person needs me right now, I will show up for them. And Anna will show up for me too. Like, she comes back around and like shows up back for him again, because it's not necessarily self-sacrifice. It's understanding this is a mutual relationship and I'm here to help because this is what I need to do for them right now, because I care about them and their needs, not saying they're not going to care about mine. You know what I mean?
Well, and the movie says that too. A bridge has two sides. And that kind of communication of meeting in the middle is important, not only to repairing the relationships between the two cultures and civilizations, but also on a microcosm of that in a relationship between Anna and Elsa, or Anna and Kristoff, or any individual person. It's so important to remember that a bridge has two sides. Both people need to step onto the bridge with the intention of making a connection, of bridging a gap. So I think that that's huge. It's the lands and the people, and they're connected by, again, that willingness is a sign of unconditional love, which is conscious leadership, if you ask me. When you choose to communicate from a place of being willing to listen and willing to compromise, that is conscious leadership. And that is something that, if we're thinking about what can we do on a social scale, investing your support in conscious leadership wherever
Yep.
that is. That could be foundations, that could be movements, that could be people who are running for office, and if they have the right platform, that's always it's a toughie on that one, but there could be someone out there that is doing that, and you can put your energy with them.
Especially on a local level.
Mm-hmm.
There's more movement on local level in a lot of spaces than there is on federal levels or even state levels. So even if you just look in small ways, also putting your money where your mouth is, back Indigenous business, back minority business, spend money in places, that are run by people who are in a different socioeconomic group than you, or a different, race than you, or whatever it is. Like, go there. Like if that's the smallest thing that you can do, is to put your money in those places, do that.
Yeah. And that's actually, like, it, to me, one of the themes in Frozen 2 is Atahalan is they find out a glacier, which is a frozen river. And the river is frozen because progress can't be made. If you think about the metaphor of a frozen river, it can't flow. And, the dam breaks, which helps the river to flow too, which is fantastic, but it can't flow because something in history stopped it. And it's waiting for that to be acknowledged and resolved. And then it can flow again. And then everybody is nourished by the river, because that's what water does. They talk about water having memory. Water does have memory, but also it is what kind of feeds all of the land. It is what nourishes everything. It's like such a life source. And it's important for everyone to be able to benefit from that. Yeah.
And as we talked about with the Black Gen Zennials, everything starts with conversation. And even they were saying is like, we just want people to be willing to sit down and have a conversation, even if they're uncomfortable. And one of the ways that Krista and I were talking about before we hopped on, and she found an amazing article about this as well, is to your Thanksgiving or Plantsgiving or Abundance Festival, whatever you want to call it, bring an Indigenous dish from your area. Incorporate Indigenous ingredients into a dish, Indigenous to your area. You can find resources about that online, but what that's going to do is it's going to start sparking those conversations between you and your family of, why did you bring this dish? Oh, it's from this Indigenous culture in our area. I included these ingredients because they're Indigenous to this area. And it's reclaiming not only the fact that you're using the words Indigenous in conversation, or the words Native in a conversation, and highlighting that particular culture, but you're also highlighting, like, remember, like, this is land that we're on that was here way before us, that grew different things. Like, we shouldn't be cultivating it necessarily in that way. And that is just a really simple way to start having those conversations, which is where change happens, is in those conversation places.
Yeah. And to the point of this article that I read, actually, it was a Native American chef who actually talked about different food sources. And it shouldn't be too surprising. Indigenous foods are foods that you probably eat all the time. And one of the things that she recommended was, like free, if you're going to go with meat, free range meat, meat that was responsibly sourced, food that was responsibly sourced, locally grown. That's something that we're doing already. Buying from your local farmer, buying from people who, if there is access to Indigenous sellers in your area, fantastic. See what they would recommend. It's like going to a menu and saying, what do you recommend on the menu in a restaurant? Go to someone who actually grows food and say, oh my gosh, what can I make with this? It's actually exciting, right? It's not you saying, hey, I'm, here doing this thing I have to do. No, it's like, this is a project that I get to do. It's my cooking project. And now I get to use these really interesting ingredients and make something. And you're just asking what someone who knows what they're talking about would recommend. And that's totally fine. We're going to be linking a Wikipedia article that shows you Indigenous cuisine of the Americas. And it's not shocking things, right? Like pumpkins are in there. So that's great. Beans, legumes, corn, all sorts of stuff that is just very like United States, American. They're there. So it's not a stretch, and it's not too much of a change that it ruins traditions that you might already have. It just adds context and adds layers of meaning and intention behind them, and creates space for conversation at the table and more things to be thankful for.
Yeah. Growing up, pine nuts are very readily available to us. They just fall from the sky. So you'd walk around in the fall and find all the pine nuts, and you'd harvest them and eat them. And that is an Indigenous tradition that I was still carrying on even in my childhood without it being called that. So one quick way that I'm going to do it is just like, well, I'm obviously going to incorporate pine nuts, locally sourced pine nuts, into cuisine, even if you can find like local honey, those kind of things, just that small level of being like, yeah, this is local, this is from an indigenous person, or this is from this, I wanted to call back to this type of cuisine that was made by this tribe of people that was here. Also, just energetically, just to talk about like the energy exchange of that is so cool to look at, because it's not only just this healing energy force. A lot of times people are like, okay, but I had one conversation with my mom, like how much is that going to do? The energetic ripple effect that has is something that we need to like acknowledge, because oftentimes they're like, yeah, but what if she never talks to anyone again? Like, how much difference did I make? You changed the energy of the room, which changed the energy of the person, which healed something on an energetic level that everyone who ever comes in contact with you is going to get another little piece of that. Because you did the thing on an energy level. Our cells quite literally talk to one another energetically. So oftentimes when you are an activated person, or you've healed something in you, just by being in the same room with someone else, you heal that in them. So it has this crazy wide reaching energetic ripple effect that I can see, because I'm one of those people who can see energy with my physical eyes. I see the energy shift. It changes colors, it changes vibration, it changes wavelength. You can actually see it happen, and you can see everyone else's energy respond to that, even if they're not part of the conversation. And that doesn't just exist for that one moment in that one time capsule. The next time your mom goes to the store and the person she interacts with, it's going to interact with them too. And it creates this vibrational impact that if all of us do that, it's a tidal wave of vibrational impact. That is actually energetically how real change happens.
Yeah. Yeah, you're creating energy warm and fuzzies around the table, which people are going to remember, and they're going to want to feel again. So they are going to recall that energy because it's a good feeling. And we all like, it's almost, I always hesitate to speak in absolutes a little bit, but like, I like the warm and fuzzies, and I know almost everybody. I can't think of a person in my life who doesn't like feeling warm, comfortable, fuzzy, wanted, and welcome. And creating a space around a table that does that, and doing it in this context that is going to expand like a warm and fuzzy blanket to everywhere you go. Awesome.
Yeah. And I do want to touch on the energy of gratitude, because it is what the day is supposed to be for also, like in its purest form. It's a time to be grateful. So one thing that I do before every time I eat dinner, I do this every time, but I recommend everyone does this. And this is a little bit of I was taught to do this by someone who had a theta healing background. It's not exactly a theta healing technique, but it's also just something that I've like adopted and done through my own energy, to program the energy of the food to be as high vibration as possible. So instead of necessarily saying grace and thankful, which yes, do that, but a way of showing gratitude to the food, if you just think about the highest vibration energy you can, whatever it looks like to you, whatever it feels like to you, and then just visualize whatever's on your plate growing from the earth, from the little seed all the way into grass, all the way into corn, whatever it is, and just visualizing that energy just being with it on its journey. You're actually going to change the energetic resonance of the food on your plate, and it's showing that food thanks in its journey by basically essentially blessing it at the core of it. And then when you consume it, you're then blessing you're actually connecting yourself to the earth on a deeper level and giving back to the earth in that way through that kind of blessing. So if instead of just saying grace, if that's not your thing, or if that doesn't feel right, doing that feels amazing.
Yeah. And if you are saying grace, it's the same thing. You're thanking, all of the things that have come to you for coming to you, and you really are what you eat. So what the nutrients in that food is going into your body, and it's helping your body rebuild and repair itself on a cellular level, just physiologically. So knowing and being like mentally at peace and mentally enjoying that and mentally conscious of what you're putting into your body is only going to make you healthier. And, that's really going to be important, even in the astrology of the coming season. Like this tends to be a time where we try to ground ourselves with food. And I know we only have a couple of minutes here, so I kind of want to bookend the episode and bookend the month with a really brief astrology thing. And then we're going to tell you what Emily and I have been reading and sort of consuming in our entertainment recently that we highly recommend as high vibe. So really quickly, as we go into this week of, if you're me, Plantsgiving or Thanksgiving or whatever you want to call it, whatever aligns with you, the big transits that are happening this week is on the 28th. We do have the sun conjunct Mercury, and that is, it's like, consider yourself like your mind blown in the best way, like your mind aligning with your identity, energy being kind of in this progressive feeling of like, I'm going to make good decisions. I'm going to make good changes. I feel like you ever feel like super smart and like good enough that's the feeling that you can really harness on this day, especially, and just know that you have that every day. But this day is going to remind you what that feels like, and things may happen around you to give you examples of what that looks like in your life and in your context. So that's awesome. On the 29th, which is my brother's birthday, we have Mars trine Neptune. So it is this uprooting of any kind of disillusionment that we might have had. It's like getting up and going and getting yourself excited to do something and to achieve your dreams and to move forward with things. And this is important because on the 30th, Venus will sextile Neptune, creating opportunities to really pursue your dreams, conceptualize them, feel into them, learn the feelings of what it's going to feel like to manifest that thing. And at the same time, the sun will sextile Saturn, which gives us an opportunity to find the resources and the steps and the process that it will take to support actually creating these things. So an amazing day for just tangibly manifesting energy. And finally, on December 1st, Neptune, which has been retrograde for quite a while, is going to move direct. So those dreamy energies, rather than being inside, your own visions and dreams, you'll be able to see them happening on the outside. You'll be able to see dreams coming into reality, meditation taking you forward, transcending your spiritual practices and things like that, which is really cool. So the things that you read are going to be important because your visualization is going to be going from concept to creation pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's a great time to actually do creative projects and absorb creative media, that kind of thing. It feels energetically. It was funny, Krista and I were talking before this, and I was like, yeah, the energy of this week, it feels like coming out of hibernation, like you're waking up and you're not 100% sure like where you at or what's going on in the world, but you're kind of just like, okay, I'm awake now and I want to do something. And that's definitely what it looks like on an energetic level of what you're going to be applying this week.
Yeah. And a lot of this energy is happening in Sagittarius and in Capricorn. So Capricorn is that whole hibernation feeling. I loved that you used that word, but Sagittarius is like, it's time to explore. Let's go. Like, so waking up and being like, where am I? Did I travel somewhere last night? And if so, what cool things can I do in the city, or what cool things can I do around me right now? So that energy is definitely there.
Yeah. And so we wanted to bookend this episode, and every last episode of the month that we release, we're going to do this segment called Bookend. So our bookend is we're going to just give you, Krista and I deeply believe in the power of high vibration, absorbing high vibration media. So whatever we're reading, whether it's fiction or like highlighting some deeper learning or anything like that, we always want to highlight the power in that, especially in storytelling specifically. So we wanted to recommend to you guys whatever books we're reading, or at least talk about the books we're reading if we're not recommending it. We just wanted to talk about whatever we're reading at the end of the month, so you guys have some high vibration stuff that if you wanted to incorporate it into your life, you can, or understand why they're not high vibration potentially, and maybe choose not to incorporate them in your life.
Yeah. So what I've been actually reading most of the month, and I've been having a good time. I was so sad. I finished it today. It's Mythos, written and narrated in the audiobook version by Stephen Fry. Because as an astrologer, I'm very aware of archetypes and the way that they help really conceptualize the different things in astrology as well. And I really wanted to, kind of attempt to get on some sort of level that, Emily, you just master when it comes to lore of deities and gods and mythology. So I was like, where can I start, but in a way that's going to hold my attention? And obviously Stephen Fry. So there you go. I jumped in. I am not sorry. It was amazing. The context, the education, the details, it was all beautiful. Highly recommend. And I highly recommend it in the audiobook version because Stephen Fry.
He narrates it. Why not?
Yeah.
She told me that I didn't even know that was a thing. She was like, I'm reading Mythos by Stephen Fry. I'm like, I'm buying it right now. No hesitation. Yeah. So I'm excited. I'm finishing up what I'm listening to before I start that because I'm excited to dive in.
So what are you listening to right now?
2 books actually. So I am listening to Adrian Young's The Last Legacy. It's a standalone that is a kind of shoot off book from her Fable duology.
Yeah.
So it takes place in the same world. I will say Fable and Namesake, that duology, I love it with such a burning passion. I've never related to a character more than I've related to Fable, I don't think. It's incredible. The world she creates is incredible. It's so high vibration. I cannot recommend it enough. And so The Last Legacy is pretty cool. It's a continuation of the world. It's a really deep exploration of exploring who you are as a person separate from your family, even when your family controls a lot of your life. which is a cool theme for right now. So I'm really into it. I haven't finished it yet, but I really like it. Also this month I listened to The Extraordinaries, and I'm listening to the second book in that series right now, which just came out. It's called Flashfire, and it is by TJ Klune, who is one of my all-time favorite authors. I love him so much. And if you're looking for a story that is really fun and really silly, and it's going to make you laugh the whole time while still exploring very, very deep concepts around grief and how we process grief and how we process relationships, and actually it's so high vibration. It is so cool. I love it very much, and it's explored through the context of a queer high school boy, and it's just hilarious. And I laughed out loud on a plane next to someone who thought it was very awkward for me to do so, which is always the sign of a fantastic read. So
Yeah.
that's what
I love that.
That's what I'm in right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to all the alchemists listening, let us know what you're listening to. You can let us know on TikTok, and you can follow us. Emily is at Liker of Words. I am at The Real KristaLyn. Let us know what you're listening to, what you recommend, anything like that. And if you have any questions about anything that you think we could help you with, if we don't know the answer, we'll find a voice that will, but we will be happy to take those into consideration for topics on future podcast episodes. We love doing that. And in the meantime, we highly suggest that you guys go make some magic.
Oh yeah, and if, I wanted to have done that too, but also if you want to watch us do these episodes, you can watch us on YouTube.
Yes.
You can actually see us visually talking to one another on YouTube and see cameos of corgis from KristaLyn.
My arm right now is actually because Jack has his nose under my arm and wants me to pet him. So if you've been seeing that, definitely watch us on YouTube, because you'll see me interacting with this dog, and he's wonderful.
Yeah, so definitely, and on KristaLyn's note,
go make some magic. We need to get better at that, but thank you guys for listening.
Bye.